Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
Hey, everyone. This is my first time posting here, and honestly, I'm trying to piece together my thoughts, so bear with me. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 7 long years. At first, everything seemed normal, maybe even blissful in the way you'd expect after a few years of settling into married life. But something changed in the last 2 years. Slowly, I watched her drift further away, as if the very air between us had thickened with something unsaid. She stopped initiating intimacy altogether. She always had an excuse. I'm too tired, or I had a rough shift. To be fair, she works as a nurse at a care home, so exhaustion was expected. But it felt like something deeper was pulling her away. The real problem, though, began when she started picking fights out of nowhere, and then she'd turn around and blame me for starting them. At first, I tried to reason with her, thinking we were both just stressed. But then the arguments got worse, and she started ignoring me, even when I was trying to reach out. Then she'd twist it around and say, I wasn't giving her enough attention. It was maddening, like she was punishing me for something I couldn't even figure out. Things got even more complicated after she gave birth to our son, Mason, this February. She was supposed to return to work in June, and that's when my gut instinct started screaming at me that something was seriously off. She seemed almost too excited to go back to work. Don't get me wrong. I understand that some people want to return to their routines after having a baby. But this was different. It felt like she was running away from something or someone, so I confronted her. My heart was pounding the whole time, but I needed to know. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She admitted she had feelings for a coworker. She said she was planning to throw herself at him once she returned to work. She didn't even sugarcoat it. She flat out told me that if the sex with him turned out to be as good as she imagined, she would have left me. Hearing those words was like having my chest split open with a cold, jagged knife. I didn't even know how to respond at first. I was shattered. And as if that wasn't enough, just yesterday, she completely broke down. The truth came tumbling out like a flood. She confessed that she'd lost patience with me. A few months back, I went through a period of impotence due to some health issues, and apparently, that was the final straw for her. She told me she felt neglected and unfulfilled and was ready to replace me because she didn't think I could make her happy anymore. She genuinely believes that this other guy, her coworker, would be the key to her happiness. I asked her why she was still holding on to me, why she hadn't just packed up and left already. And what did she say? Not that she loves me? Oh no. She said she's staying because I'm a good man and a good provider. I can't even begin to describe the gut punch that was. The one thing I was desperate to hear, those 3 little words, never came. Instead, I got practical reasons, but nothing from the heart. She claims she wants to work on the marriage, but after everything she said, I can't help but wonder if she's just saying that because she doesn't have a backup plan anymore. I've started going to therapy to sort through all of this, but lately, I've become hypersensitive to her moods, to her expressions. She'll talk like everything is fine, but I can see it in her face, this deep, quiet pain she's trying to hide. I don't know if it's guilt or resentment, but it's there, lingering like a storm cloud. Then, to top it all off, I found out that this guy she was so eager to throw herself at. He has a baby and another woman. That's when she really broke down, admitting how deeply hurt and disappointed she was. I could barely believe it. She was devastated that he wasn't available to make her happy. The irony was too much to bear. Now I'm numb. My marriage feels like it's in a coma, and I don't even know if I want to wake it up. I've been giving her a false sense of security, playing along as if I'm still invested, but in reality I'm just waiting for her to let her guard down so I can gather proof of her infidelity. I need something solid so I can leave, before I lose myself completely in this mess. First off, thank you all for the comments and advice so far. I've read through each one carefully, and I wanted to take a moment to clarify a few things, especially since there seems to be some confusion. To start, Emily doesn't work overnight shifts like many assume. Her hours are long, but they're predictable. She works from 8 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., and only on Saturdays and Sundays. That's it. No overnight stays, no extra shifts. She's always home during the week. I thought that would be a good thing, that it would give us more time together. But even when she's physically here, she's distant, distracted, like her mind is elsewhere. It's like living with a stranger who just happens to share your bed. I should also mention that she got pregnant with our second child, Mason, in May of last year. Before that, she was working at a different nursing job, but she left that position in January. The thing is, once she quit, she didn't leave the house much at all. For months, she was home all the time, and yet somehow, I still felt like I was losing her. It's hard to explain, but something about her just felt off. I was always trying to connect, but it was like talking to someone through glass. Now here's the part that's been eating away at me, the part I haven't really talked about until now. I can't shake this gnawing doubt about the paternity of my eldest child, Olivia. She's 6 years old now, and she looks nothing like me. People have commented on it too, and I've brushed it off for years, but it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Meanwhile, everyone says my daughter Olivia and my son Mason look like they could be twins, even though they're several years apart. It's uncanny, really. But the resemblance between them doesn't erase the doubt I have about Olivia. It's a quiet, nagging suspicion that I've never been able to silence, no matter how much I try to push it down. There's one more thing that strikes me as odd. Even though Emily only works weekends now, she's very punctual about calling me the moment her shift ends at 8:30 p.m. sharp. Without fail, she's on the phone, supposedly wrapping up at work, talking to me as she finishes her day. I used to find comfort in that routine, thinking it was her way of showing she still cared. But now, I'm not so sure. Part of me wonders if those calls are just a cover, a way to make sure I'm not suspicious of where she is or what she's really doing. It's hard to trust anything anymore. There are so many pieces of this puzzle that don't quite fit, and I'm left trying to make sense of it all, questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and even myself. Earlier today, she came back from the school run, and you know what? She was acting all sweet and loving, like the perfect wife. It felt so fake, like she was putting on a show for an audience that wasn't even there. And after everything that's happened, it just pissed me off. The sudden shift in her attitude was like a slap in the face, and I couldn't stand it. The rage that's been bubbling under the surface, anger I've tried so hard to keep in check, was close to boiling over. I got the kids, Olivia and Mason, settled in their rooms and decided it was time to confront her. No more pretending. No more playing nice. I needed to know the truth. What was really going on in her head? And like some of you predicted, she started lying, right through her teeth. She tried to spin some story, probably hoping I'd be too exhausted to see through it, but I wasn't having any of it. My emotions got the better of me, though. I let it all out. The frustration, the betrayal, everything I'd been bottling up for months. That's when she slipped up, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. She told me his name. Luke. This co-worker she's been obsessed with, the one she was ready to throw away our marriage for. The name was like a spark to gasoline. I'm not a violent man by nature, but in that moment I felt rage unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I'm 5'11" and used to train in kickboxing, so the thought of finding Luke and knocking some sense into him didn't feel so far-fetched. I told her flat out, with all the fury in my voice, I'm going to your workplace, and I'm going to beat him within an inch of his life. That's when everything shifted. Emily completely broke down. All the walls she'd put up came crashing down, and the truth started pouring out, ugly and raw. She confessed that she never anticipated how much sacrifice marriage would require, how much she'd have to give up. She admitted that she wasn't happy, and it wasn't just because of our arguments. She said she felt trapped, like she couldn't even talk to her parents or her sister anymore without feeling judged or conflicted. Now, her parents, they're a whole different story. Both of them are Jamaican, though they split their time between the UK and the States. Her mother, though, has been a real thorn in our side. Last year, when we rented a property from her father, her mother came to visit us. Things were already tense, but she escalated it by calling the police on me. She made a false claim, saying I was violent and that I had abused her daughter. It was all a lie, of course, and it was disproved quickly, but the damage was done. She did it because she never approved of me, not because of who I am as a person, but because, in her eyes, I wasn't good enough. I'm Jamaican-born, and she always wanted her daughter to marry someone British. Since then, her father has been no better. He's been subtle in his disrespect, but it's always there, this constant undercurrent of contempt. After the police incident, though, he stopped being subtle. He would make these little digs, poking at me, pushing my buttons. I managed to keep my cool for a while, but in August I reached my breaking point. He kept provoking me until I snapped. I was ready to knock him out, to show him I wasn't going to take his disrespect anymore. But before I could act, Emily pulled me into a room. She told me to think carefully about what I was about to do because, apparently, her father had the power to get my visa revoked. She knew just how to stop me. We've moved into a new place since then. But none of that has really solved the underlying issues. I'm starting to think she might need serious help. There's something off about her mentality lately. Her behavior has become erratic, unstable even. The way she swings between affection and anger, the way she lies so easily and then breaks down. I don't know how to help her, but I'm starting to believe that she needs more than just therapy. I've decided to take her to a hospital for a proper evaluation. I don't know what else to do. It's like she's slipping away, and I'm afraid if I don't act soon, there won't be anything left to save, of her or of us. So the DNA results came back, and I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Both kids are mine. Olivia and Mason are truly my blood. That news lifted a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. But just as one burden was lifted, another began to take shape. After everything that's happened, I reached out to a lawyer and went through the process of legal separation. It felt surreal, almost like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The paperwork was one thing, but the emotional toll was another. I can't help but feel a sense of finality about it all. In the midst of all this, Emily and I attended a counseling session together. I went in hopeful, thinking maybe we could find some common ground, some way to move forward. Instead, what I discovered was shocking. It was revealed that she's been experiencing a mental breakdown. To her, I had somehow morphed into the villain in her story. I never wanted to be her enemy, but in her eyes, I was always out to get her. She spoke of me as if I had some hidden agenda, like I was the one orchestrating this whole mess. It was maddening to hear. At this point, I'm utterly exhausted and completely burned out. Every conversation feels like running a marathon, and I'm just dragging myself to the finish line. Thankfully, my friend Sarah has been a lifesaver during this chaotic period. She often comes over to help with the kids, to make dinner, and just to be there when I need someone to talk to. She's been my rock, providing the support I desperately need while I navigate this storm. Everything is moving forward as planned. I'm pushing for the divorce, and I learned she should be served today at work. Part of me is curious about how that drama will unfold. Will she break down in front of her coworkers? Will they finally see the cracks in her facade? But honestly, I'm trying to focus on my own healing rather than the chaos her life has become. I know the next few months are going to be painful and filled with challenges. Each day feels like climbing a steep hill, and some days I just want to give up. But despite the pain, I can finally see a light at the end of this dark tunnel. It's faint, but it's there, flickering with the promise of brighter days ahead. This might be my last post in this journey. I'm learning to let go, to embrace what lies ahead, and to reclaim my life and my happiness. Thank you all for your support and for sharing this journey with me. Here's to new beginnings, however uncertain they may be.
Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
Hey, first time posting here, so bear with me. Honestly, I've been a little paranoid that my ex might stumble upon this since she might recognize my username, but it's been nearly 5 years since the breakup, so screw it. It's time to get this off my chest. If this isn't the right place for this kind of story, feel free to let me know. Buckle up, though. This is going to be a long one. I met my ex when we were both in college. I was 25 and she was 23. I hadn't really dated much before her. I had just come out of a rough, year-long relationship that didn't work out, but we ended on okay terms. My ex before her was severely depressed. I cared about her deeply, but the weight of her depression was crushing me. I'd consider myself an empath, and it got to a point where her sadness would just consume me. So, I had to walk away. It wasn't easy, but I needed to save myself. Then came Jessica, not her real name, the one who would change everything. We lived in the same apartment complex, and while we'd bump into each other a few times, it was a ride I gave her one evening that really started everything. I had helped her out a few times with little things, but that ride turned into conversations, which turned into hours together, whether we were at her place or at the sandwich shop where she worked late shifts. She was taking time off from school after dealing with some serious depression and a failed engagement from the previous year. I'd later come to learn she never actually finished school and bounced between a couple of different universities. We bonded over her stories, how she'd been betrayed by her ex, how he cheated on her. But looking back now, I question how much of that was even true. In no time, we were inseparable. We started as friends with benefits, but just 2 months in, she introduced me to her parents. That felt like a pretty serious step for something that wasn't even labeled as a relationship yet. A few months in, I realized I wanted more. I wasn't interested in anyone else, and I thought it was obvious we were exclusive. So I asked her to make it official and be my girlfriend. She turned me down, saying she wasn't ready because of the baggage from her past engagement. In hindsight, that should have been my first red flag. But like the fool I was, I gave her a pass and told myself it'd be fine. Even though she didn't want to put a label on it, we were exclusive. Neither of us was seeing anyone else. After about a month, I brought it up again. I figured if we were already acting like we were in a relationship, we might as well admit it. But she still resisted. She was stubborn about it, and I didn't understand why. There were moments when things were perfect between us. She seemed to enjoy everything I liked. We shared similar goals, and at times it really felt like we were made for each other. But there were cracks in that illusion. Sometimes she'd make subtle digs at me, or she'd start comparing me to her exes. The smallest disagreements would spiral into full-blown fights, and I'd try to calm things down, but she would escalate them instead. More than once, she'd storm out of my apartment, and I'd chase after her. That only made her angrier, and she'd accuse me of smothering her and not giving her space. So the next time, I didn't chase her. That's when she turned around and accused me of not caring. Looking back, she was gaslighting me, though I didn't know the term at the time. She'd convince me that things I clearly remembered happening never actually did, but I was in love, so I brushed it off, told myself it didn't matter. My friends, on the other hand, didn't see it that way. They kept telling me I deserved better, that she wasn't treating me right, but I was too wrapped up in the relationship to listen. Take note, your friends often see things you don't. A year into dating, I was still pushing for us to be official. She kept saying she wasn't ready, but also that I was the best guy she had ever dated. All her friends knew about us, but I wasn't a fan of them. They had this exclusive, cliquey vibe that I couldn't stand. Plus, they had a cat, and I'm allergic, so I had a solid excuse to avoid those hangouts. Despite all the drama, we spent a lot of time together. We'd go on dates, and every night without fail, she'd call me, and we'd stay on the phone until one of us passed out. She said my presence was comforting, that I helped her sleep, especially when her depression was getting the best of her. But things weren't perfect. Sometimes she'd get physical, not during arguments, but just randomly. Twice, she slapped me hard across the face because she thought it was funny. I told her both times that it wasn't okay. I'd never do something like that to her, and I expected the same respect. Once, during one of our bigger arguments, she snapped and said, "My roommate knows a bunch of guys in the complex who would be more than happy to hook up with me, so I don't even need you." That stung. Finally, after a little more than a year, she agreed to be my girlfriend officially. But even then, something was off. She acted like we were keeping it a secret from everyone but her family. It didn't sit right with me, but I ignored the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I had gotten what I wanted, right? I'll be honest, I wasn't the perfect boyfriend either. I have my own struggles with depression, and the weight of work, school, family, and the ups and downs of our relationship would sometimes overwhelm me. There were moments when I lashed out. Never physically, but I'd call her out on the things she'd done that hurt me. It wasn't healthy, and we broke up more than once. Sometimes I'd be the one to end things, other times it was her. But we always ended up right back in each other's arms. It was this toxic cycle of breaking up and making up. There was one time, though, when I took things too far. Feeling desperate and manipulated by the emotional roller coaster she'd put me on, I self-harmed. I wanted to show her just how much the pain of our relationship was affecting me. She had also harmed herself and had been open about feeling suicidal during our time together. I hate to admit it, but that's where I got the idea from. Despite all of this, I was deeply in love with her. She said she loved me too. We even talked about getting married, having kids, where we would live, all of it. During this period, she moved twice. First, to an apartment just down the street, and then, after a while, back to her parents' place about an hour away. When she moved to that nearby apartment, she threw a party one night. At the end, none of her friends stuck around to help clean up, just me. I stayed late, scrubbing the mess while she watched, and she smiled and said, "This just proves you'd be a good husband." That made me feel both proud and uncomfortable, but I swallowed it down, trying to hold on to that glimmer of a future she was dangling in front of me. Once she moved back to her parents' house, I made it a point to visit her almost every weekend. But something started to change. She was slower to reply to my texts, and she'd let my calls go unanswered for hours. But when she reached out to me, she expected a response immediately. And no matter what, I'd drop everything to be there for her. Even if it was 1 a.m. and I had work or school the next day, I'd drive to see her because she said she needed me. A few months after her move, I started to hint at getting engaged, but she began to fall back into the same excuses she'd used when we were debating becoming official. She blamed her hesitation on the trauma from her past relationship. Then she dropped a bomb. She asked if we could go back to casually dating, and the fool I was, I agreed. I thought if I gave her space, it would prove I was the guy for her. For the next few months, she went on dates with other guys, and she would tell me about them, about how none of them could compare to me. I clung to those words, holding on to the hope that I was still the one for her. Meanwhile, I stayed loyal. I didn't date anyone else because I was still hopelessly in love with her. I even told her that if she met someone she wanted to be with, I'd end things so she could pursue him. But then, after a long talk with my friends and family, I had a realization. Why was I doing all of this for someone who wasn't even my girlfriend anymore? So, I confronted her. I told her that any physical relationship between us needed to stop unless we got back to being exclusive. She agreed, or at least that's what she said. But that's not what happened. We'd still go on dates, and she'd guilt me, pressure me, and eventually I'd cave. Every time I gave in, she'd get angry afterward. She'd say, "Why didn't you stop me? Why couldn't you resist?" It became a twisted game, and I felt trapped. She grew more abusive, more manipulative. The worst was when she told me, "If I get pregnant, I'll never tell you and I'll decide what to do on my own." That cut deep, because I'd always wanted to be a father. The idea that she'd keep something like that from me crushed me. But even then, we'd fight, and eventually, we'd make up. All the while, we kept talking about our future together. She'd see a mixed-race baby somewhere, I'm Latino and she was white, and say, "That could have been our baby," with this wistful look in her eyes. Whenever she was feeling down, she'd call me and ask, "Would you still marry me?" And without hesitation, I'd say, "Of course I would. I love you." It wasn't until Christmas when things really started to fall apart. I was in Florida, visiting my brother for the holidays. I'd text her, and she wouldn't reply for hours, sometimes not at all. I'd call her late at night like we always did, but she wouldn't pick up. The one time she did call, it was to ask if I had a particular movie on DVD. I asked her why she wanted it, and she said it was to watch with her family. But something felt off. When I got back from vacation and started the new semester, she came to my university for some reason. She called me, saying she had lost her Fitbit and needed my help to find it. I showed up to help her, and we spent a little time together. But something was different. She seemed distant. Then, she told me she wanted me to come up to her parents' house in 2 days because she had something important to talk about. I knew then what was coming. I talked to my friends and started mentally preparing for the worst. When I pulled up to her parents' house, it was late. Around 10 p.m., like she'd asked. She got into my car and we sat there talking for what felt like an hour. That's when she told me she no longer wanted to be with me. I could feel this conversation had been coming, so I told her I understood. I admitted that I'd felt the distance between us and asked if it was because of someone else. She denied it, saying there wasn't another person. She just didn't think we were right for each other anymore. Then she said something that hit me like a gut punch. She admitted that she never saw me as husband material, that she'd known from the very beginning she didn't see us getting married or having kids. I was stunned. I thought back to all the times she'd asked me if I'd marry her, all the conversations we had about our future, about our hypothetical children. It was all a lie. Then she said something even worse. She told me that one of the reasons she didn't want to be with me was because our kids wouldn't look like her since I'm Latino and she's white. It was absurd, especially because she always claimed to be so progressive and not racist. What a joke, right? I was shocked, but also, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I told her that I loved her but agreed that we were done. We decided on no contact after that. She insisted on blocking me on Facebook, saying that if I tried to block her, I wouldn't be able to keep her blocked for long. Fine. I didn't care anymore. We agreed not to block each other's phone numbers just in case there was an emergency, since I didn't have any family nearby, she said. As I drove away, I felt the sadness creeping in, but weirdly enough, it was mixed with a sense of freedom. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The next month was rough, though. Nights were the worst. I realized just how codependent I'd become on her. I had gotten so used to those nightly phone calls. Without them, I felt incredibly alone. I spent many nights lying on my bedroom floor, crying, feeling completely broken. But eventually, I started throwing myself into work, school, and spending time with my friends. It was a slow climb, but I was getting through it. Then, out of nowhere, about a month later, I got a call from her early one morning. I figured it was an emergency, so I picked up, but there was no emergency. It sounded like she had butt-dialed me, but that didn't add up. We hadn't spoken in a month. What were the odds she'd accidentally call me? I could hear bits and pieces of a conversation. Her voice, and then another voice. Definitely a guy. I heard them talking about snow, and I swear I heard my name come up. Then the call just ended. I knew I shouldn't have, but I reached out to a few friends, And that's when I learned she'd started dating someone new. Against my better judgment, I texted her, asking if she was okay. It took her a few days to respond, but when she did, she said that she had butt-dialed me but had actually wanted to talk. She told me she missed my friendship, and for a few minutes it felt like old times, like nothing had changed. Then she mentioned she had started seeing someone, and I told her I already knew. She was curious how I found out, and I told her I'd heard through mutual friends. She began talking about this new guy, pointing out all his flaws. I just listened, but something about the conversation felt off. She made a comment about his weird hair, and I stupidly agreed. Then she got defensive, saying that I wouldn't know what his hair used to look like, and I quickly backpedaled, saying I thought she was talking about his current look. After that, she asked if I'd been sending her random Facebook friend requests, implying that I might be trying to stalk her online. I assured her it wasn't me. The more I thought about our conversation, the more uncomfortable I felt. It was like I was back in that same toxic cycle, being dragged down by her drama. The next day, I sent her a message, telling her that while it was nice to talk like we used to, I thought we should stick to not speaking. She agreed, and that's when I finally blocked her number. A week later, I was walking across campus when I noticed I had a voicemail. It was from her, asking if I was home because she wanted to drop some things off. I was pissed. There was nothing worth her returning, and I told her we weren't supposed to have contact. I couldn't believe she'd shown up at my place and left stuff at the front door without even letting me know in advance. I was done. I decided to write her an email, laying everything out. I told her that I had loved her with everything I had, but that she had mistreated me and lied to me in ways I couldn't forgive. I thanked her parents for always being kind to me. They had always told me what a great boyfriend I was. But then I made it clear that this was the end. No more contact. I told her she was now blocked on my phone and that if we ever ran into each other in the future, it would be simple. The way you treat me is how I will treat you. If you treat me like a friend, I'll treat you like a friend. If you treat me like an enemy, I'll treat you like an enemy. And if you act like I don't exist, I'll act like you don't exist either. I sent the email, fully expecting to never hear back from her. Boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I got a reply. But it wasn't from her. It was from her dad. Now, her dad is an ex-Marine and a lawyer, so you can imagine how this went down. In his email, he insisted that I leave his daughter alone, accusing me of stalking her. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How on earth was I stalking her? I lived an hour away, juggling school, work, and friends. Then he claimed I was creating fake Facebook accounts to cyber-stalk her. Sure, I'd looked at her account a few times through a friend's account, but who hasn't done that? What really threw me was when he quoted my email about treating her the way she treats me. He highlighted that part and said, "I consider this a threat." He warned me to leave her alone or he would pursue a restraining order. I was blown away. I'd always gotten along well with her dad. I couldn't believe what I was reading. After talking to a few people, I decided to respond. I reminded him that I wanted nothing to do with his daughter. It was her who reinitiated contact. In fact, she was the one who showed up at my house unannounced a week earlier. If I were a stalker, why would she take that risk? I told him that his accusations were baseless and that no judge would grant a restraining order based on that nonsense. I made it clear, never contact me again, and I'd do the same. But that left me wondering, what the hell was going on? What stories was she telling people about me? What sob story was she spinning? I shared the email exchange with some friends, and they were just as shocked. They said I'd dodged a nuclear bomb and should be thankful. I thought that would be the end of it. But this is a cheating story. A long one, but a cheating story nonetheless. We broke up in January. Just after the first week of April, a friend messaged me while I was at work telling me that my ex had just gotten engaged. I was floored. It had only been 3 months since we split. For someone who had constantly said how difficult relationships were for her because of her cheating, abusive ex-fiancé, this made no sense. What shocked me even more was a comment on her engagement announcement. Someone congratulated her and claimed to have helped her get together with this new guy back in November. November, when we were still together. Sure, we weren't exclusive at that point, but I had given her several chances to be honest, and she lied about there being someone else. To me, that felt like cheating. I was livid. It all started to click. That's why she'd become distant during Christmas. That was who she wanted to watch that movie with. That hurt. But I tried to move on with my life. I was still battling depression and trust issues. I talked about it with friends and people at church. The more I opened up, the more I learned about her. People who knew her but didn't know we dated started coming forward saying, "Yeah, that girl has issues." They shared things they probably shouldn't have, but it was helpful. I found out all the nasty things she had said about others, and I realized she never really cared about me. I was just a stepping stone, someone to care for her until someone better came along. It dawned on me that the reason I fell in love with her wasn't because of who she was, but because of the persona she projected. She knew I was a nice guy and saw me as an empathic target to manipulate. She reflected my own qualities back at me, making me think I was dating someone similar to myself. But in reality, I had been with a narcissist. This revelation helped me understand a lot about myself. That I care too much, love too deeply, and need to be careful about who I give my heart to. Lesson learned. 6 months passed without incident. I hadn't run into her, but I heard she had moved back to my city with her new husband. So much for me being a stalker. A few friends even had run-ins with her, one of whom embarrassed her by making a sexual innuendo about something she'd done. Love you, Danny boy. Brothers for life. I got invited to a friend's wedding. I couldn't make it to the actual ceremony, but I did make it to the reception. Just as I was finishing up a light-hearted speech poking fun at my friend, who had this annoyingly loud laugh, you wouldn't believe it. I was about to sit down when a mutual friend walked into the room, and right behind her, my ex and her husband. I was a bit surprised to see her. Just as she was about to walk in, our eyes met. In that moment, instead of entering the room, she pushed her husband back into the hallway out of sight, and quickly followed. I was taken aback, so I stepped outside to collect my thoughts and feelings. I was generally fine, but the shock of seeing her stirred something inside me. After a few minutes, I returned to the room, only to notice that my ex and her husband had still not come in. I asked my friend if he had invited them, and he said yes. I told him a heads up would have been nice, but he shrugged it off, saying he hadn't thought about it. He wasn't that close of a friend, more like a mutual friend of one of my best friends. Minutes passed, and as the newlyweds prepared for their first dance, we all moved some chairs out of the way. I happened to be on one side of a door, putting chairs away, when my ex walked through that exact door. She saw I was right next to her and bolted to the other side of the room with her husband in tow. We avoided each other for the rest of the reception, exchanging only a couple of glances. But in that moment, I felt whole again. For all those months after the breakup, I had felt broken, like a piece of myself was missing. Seeing her reaction, how ashamed she seemed to be, was empowering. I felt my strength returning. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. Even though she was married and I wasn't, I realized I had won the breakup. She couldn't even look at me. I had no such issues. My conscience was clear. And here I am, over 4 years after the breakup, writing this. I'm still single, but overall, I'm happy. And Maddie, if you ever read this, fuck you. I'm the one who finished university while you've settled into being a housewife. After all that talk about changing the world and whatnot, all you're ever going to change are dirty diapers. You're a liar and a cheat.